The Grandparent's House and the Mystery of the Candles, Part 5. At least that's how we felt. For being in the middle of many people who lived their totally normal lives, we spent the night there. Saturday afternoon, we didn't go with Brian to my house. He had gone to the grandparents' house before to look at that room, and he said that whatever it was, he was feeling worse and worse. Edouard at that moment apologized to us and told us that he could not and would not go on. Neither would he allow Lucia to do so. Brian then decided not to tell Edouard what he now knew and gave us at least a clearer idea of what was going on in that place, or at least what had caused it. If he no longer wants to get involved in this, it's fine. It really is not necessary that Edouard has to live knowing something like this, he told me. Then he told me the story. The next day was very important. My uncle Rodolfo would finally go with a priest to the house, a well-known priest that had managed to convince to give a visit and bless it after the masses that day. We're going to go too, Brian told me, and that Saturday night, the saddest I remembered in my life, while we drank coffee, he told me the story. Don Jose was reluctant to tell them the story from the first moment. He realized that they had not called him to offer a job, only that way they had gotten his address. However, it was evident that he knew exactly what Brian was referring to when he asked him about the house down the street. The grandparents' house? He also knew very well that both grandparents had passed away, and later we found out that he was the one who asked his son to go and check how everything was going. But for some reason, he refused to share what he knew with my cousins, perhaps because he saw them almost like two children after leaving home, disappointed and thinking that they would not achieve anything. They ran into Don Jose's son, who was returning from doing a little work. An illness of his father was deteriorating him little by little, thus diminishing his ability to go to work. And the young man was taking over more and more completely the family business. Repairs and simple maintenance services, for that reason, even being very young, had touched him to know exactly what happened in the grandparents' house, which most likely would trigger what came later. It all started as routine repair. A house as old as that one needed constant maintenance, so it wasn't unusual for my grandparents to call Don Jose every time a new breakdown appeared. This one, however, was going to require more heavy work, especially breaking a floor and digging. So Don Jose took his son and two of his assistants to help him that weekend. Suddenly, after digging almost a meter, looking for where the leaks in the pipes was, they found a small chest. They had already found some valuable things buried in the yard, something that was common in houses through the Revolution, as in that other occasion. However, they would wait for the grandparents to open the chest and check it. However, when they took it out, underneath they noticed other things covered with cloth. A little further down, another chest and more cloth bags that contained something inside. When the grandparents arrived, they entered that room to check, and Don Jose asked his son and his assistants to leave. The boy disobeying, he stayed, watched it through a crack in the door. When they began to discover everything that was wrapped in the cloth, the expression of the grandparents went from expectation to concern and then almost to disgust. They continued taking things out of the cloth bags one by one, and they were placing them on that old wooden table. The boy could not see what they were talking about, and eventually they came to the two small chests. The boy was scared and ran to the garden. He hid behind the angel, and from there, he watched as his grandmother ran out and went to the other side of the house, to the kitchen. And there she started to talk on the phone, and the boy, hoping not to be seen, went back to the room. But he found the door already closed. He only heard the grandfather say again and again inside, "It can't be! It can't be!" And he also listened to his father, Don Jose, after his grandfather to calm down. When the two helpers returned from the break, Don Jose asked them to leave and his son to wait in the kitchen for a while. That little while that they had promised him turned into full hours until it got dark, and then several men arrived at the house. By the familiarity with which they spoke, the boy believes they were friends of the grandfather, which soon after they left carrying with them everything they had found, and Don Jose told his son that it was time to return home. He didn't say a word in the car, but halfway down the road, he stopped in the middle of a dark street and got out. There, Don Jose vomited, screamed, and with his eyes full of tears returned to the car again without saying a word, not even a glance. Then they arrived home lepido, only to his son to enter and not to say anything to his mother, and he stayed in the car. After a while, he entered and went directly to the bedroom. Without dinner, this was all that the boy knew for sure. But little comments he heard later, conversations between his parents, loose words made him suspect about what they found on the occasion were at hand. They seemed of a mummy. They were real, that they were human, that they were which was seemed to have formed of a baby. Phases were lost and words without connection that he heard his father say asleep while he had nightmares. The young man told them, "I don't know well what they found there. My father returned to finish that work alone, and since then he got sick. Since that day I had to do repairs in the house, but I never knew what happened. I never really knew what they found, but I know they woke up something, and since then everything changed." While Brian told me what the boy had told him, I couldn't stop looking at him surprised. I never imagined the grandparents in that situation dealing with that kind of thing. They were so calm, but I didn't understand why Brian started to cry while he was sharing what they had just told him. To tell the truth, it seemed exaggerated to me. I told him, he looked at me seriously and answered me. I talked to my mom. Grandpa told her at some point in confidence the history, the stories of those who lived in the house before of Grandpa's family. I don't know if you want to know them, Angel. They are things that, for some reason, they never shared with their family, even less with their grandchildren. When he told me that, I knew that there was no turning back, so I asked him to do it. And Brian told me then about our ancestors. He told me things from the occultism that they practiced at the beginning of the 12th century there. The passing of the revolution that was terrible for thousands of people in the country, caught in the middle of two fires of the sides that would not give in or concede anything and who didn't care about the innocent. Then he told me the stories of the 40s and 50s, the time of the supposed progress of the country, the time for which progress in the country and revolution, and in the time where there was two fires, and within this revolution, that time supposedly the progress at the house seemed to remain in time. There were several stories so incredible that they even shared in chronicles of the time. One of them was the revenge that a soldier swore with his boss, a ruthless landowner who tortured the peons and raped their women. When the revolution broke out, a young peon had seen that man, tortured to death his older brother, swore that he was going to kill him and that he would do to his daughter what he did to dozens of women. About to fall into the hands of people, this rancher managed to escape with his little girl with the help of the girl's nannies. The man, with all the evil that he had very good friends of his entire confidence in his city. Among those friends, my grandfather's family had asked them to hide in the house, but they refused. I told them it was impossible to put the whole family at risk for him. However, they agreed to stay with the daughter until he found another place to put her safe. Weeks later, they had to leave the house to take shelter in another city because it was very dangerous for them to stay in one place. But when they left, the girl didn't appear anywhere. They searched for hours throughout the house, in the street, and they asked in the houses around, and nothing. No one saw her. Being impossible to wait, they left. When they eventually were able to return almost a year later, they unnailed walls and windows and found the girl's body, but she had not been dead for more than 2 months. That's, according to the doctor, meant that she had spent months completely alone, feeding on who knows what, in complete darkness, agony, and in the same house many years before. An older sister, the grandfather, had left school at an early age and was confined to that room in the back, isolated from everyone. Over time, the siblings began to worry, and she screamed at night, cried all day, asking to be let out. When the parents finally allowed her to leave, it was only to confine her in the convent. The siblings never heard from her again. Listening to the stories I made in my head, the same connections that my cousins surely made, but none dared to say them out loud. He told me many more stories that were shared with him in a context completely outside of what we would think as normal. Stories that his mother told him as if talking about eccentricities of people from another time, but for us all this was terrifying. Every detail meant something important, and when we arrived, my Uncle Rodolfo was already there in the house with 2 priests. We talked with them for a while. We found it extremely strange how understanding they both were and how they didn't seem to doubt our stories about the things that we experienced there. You'd be surprised to know the things we had to deal with sometimes. One of the priests told us, the older one, the other one I remember seeing at Grandma's funeral dressed in civilian clothes. He was very serious but seemed to know more about it. He told us that Grandma had come to him telling him certain things that had happened in that house. I know that at some point things started to happen here and that the holy water and what I got to do to help them was not enough. Then Grandma resorted to something else, to another type of beliefs, and she told me very repentant, hoping that I'd forgive her. When she finished saying that, we looked at him with confusion, maybe noticing that he clarified, "Don't worry, his grandmother was not exactly Catholic or religious, so it's not a secret of confession or anything like that because she shared it with me in a chat."